Very good morning. Welcome along to Ireland AM on Virgin Media 1.
Hello, it is Wednesday, the 3rd of April, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Lovely to have you.
Coming up, we're going to be getting the reaction to Minister Simon Coveney's impending departure, what it means for him and for the presumptive Taoiseach, Simon Harris.
You walk around, I'm the presumptive Taoiseach. Oh, yeah. We're also going to be continuing our discussion on teacher shortages. We're going to be speaking to educators who've moved abroad for a better life. Do you think that they can be enticed home? What's life like for them there? Is the plan to eventually move home? We'll find out more in just a little while.
Get in touch with us on that one. Also, we're going to be catching up with the Galway man, Gavin Hennigan, who's just back from the Alaskan wilderness, where he won the world's toughest winter marathon.
Like, just watching the videos.
Insane. Absolutely. Check him out online. Crazy.
Unbelievable. Chatting to him in just a little while. Deric is in Cork this morning. How are you doing, Deric?
Yes, good morning, team. We're broadcasting live here from Cork this morning. Gorgeous start down here for the Rebel County. Now, we do have plenty of showers, unfortunately, through parts of the east, up around northern areas. Some bright weather out there today, then more rain up from Munster later on today. So a bit of a rinse and repeat cycle out there for the 3rd of April. So do stay nice and dry out there today. Now, we're just here, just off the N25 on the road towards Carricktunnel, and there you'll find Padel Tennis Ireland. Now, it's a growing sport not only here in Ireland, but right across the world. So we're going to be meeting the team, the crew down there a little bit later on this morning. Muireann, how are your paddling skills? Are you up for a challenge?
I'm a mad paddler, mad into whacking things, Deric. You know myself. You know that. Looking forward to seeing you do your thing.
I'll give it a good shot.
Oh, we know that you will. You're so competitive. We think it's Tommy, but it's actually you that's the competitive one. And speaking of himself, he's just had enough. He's like, you know what? I've given it 2.5 years. I'm off. He's abandoned me. Alan, where are you this morning? You're not in studio either.
No, well, Muireann, I just had to pop to the loo because, yeah, literally I just had to come to the loo because a little later on we're going to be talking about toilet etiquette. And if you, what you do when you're going to the loo, especially at work, if you were like this at two urinals, would you stand beside somebody? Would you have the chats with them? Or would you be embarrassed to go? Do you hold your pee and poo because you don't want to go to the loo, especially at work? And do you have your, do you have your favourite cubicle?
Give me a second.
Literally spends his morning in Oh dear.
He didn't have his pants down in rehearsal, by the way.
He didn't have his pants down in rehearsal. That's what we're going to be talking about. If you came across a workmate in that, how would you get over it? That's all coming up. Back to you, Muireann.
Ireland AM, it's the hard-hitting stuff that you need right here, don't you? Thank you so much for that. If you missed that now, we'll play it for you again later on. Also coming up today, we're going to be showing you how to use up all the leftover Easter grub in the kitchen. Plus, with the children at home this week, our science man Phil, he will be back with some weird and wacky experiments. And a reminder to get in touch with us on whatever we're talking about today. You know we love to hear from you. Toilet etiquette. It's 0896 111 111. But
you need to be chilled to handle Irish weather. That's why Chill sponsor weather updates on Virgin Media 1.
Thank you, Hannah, and a very good morning. Broadcasting live here just outside Carricktunnel here in Cork on the N25. Coming up later on this morning, we're off to pay a visit to Padel Tennis Ireland, one of the fastest growing sports here in the country. So that's all coming your way at 8:45 later on into the next hour. Now, we're opening up the 3rd of April, and Alvaro Valera with us cameras this morning. So let's take a look how it's shaping up for the day ahead. And out there at the moment, gorgeous start down here in Cork at the moment, holding dry and settle. A different story through parts of northern Leinster, up around parts of the north, through the northeast. Some very heavy rain there at the moment in parts of Roscommon, into Cavan and Longford, not escaping either there through Edgeworthstown. So do stay nice and dry if you're in those neck of the woods and those light to locally moderate northwesterly winds. Now, right across today, that system of showers we're seeing through the north at the moment, northeast will track out into the Irish Sea, and in behind it we will see an improving picture out there today. So return to some brighter spells mainly through the afternoon, but it will slip down south once again because we will see more rain feed up across the country as we push away into the back end of the day. Top values of around 8 to 12 degrees. And then into tonight, a good deal of cloud cover across the island. Patchy mist and drizzle. Some fog forming as well as those winds continue to slacken and holding steady in terms of those values with overnight lows there at 3 to 7 degrees. So that's how it's shaping up here in a bright and settled Cork at the moment, holding pretty steady down here this morning. We'll be back again live at 7:35.
You need to be chilled to handle Irish weather. That's why Chill sponsor weather updates on Virgin Media One.
Time now to take a look at this morning's paper, starting with the Irish Times. Its headline: former Irish soldiers trained rogue generals' forces in Libya. They report that an Offaly-based company founded by Irish veterans recruited departing and former members of the Army Rangers Wings and Defence Forces to train the rogue army of a Libyan general.
€1,200 gap between cheapest and most expensive creches. That's the front page of the Irish Independent. Parents living in South Dublin pay the highest monthly fees in the country for creches. That's €1,200 more than the lowest price county, a special investigation has found.
The Examiner's front page: Coveney could mount bid for Europe. Speculation is growing that Simon Coveney could run in the upcoming European elections following his decision to step down from Cabinet next week.
Fresh crisis in Fine Gael as Coveney quits. That's the top story on the Daily Mail. They say crisis in Fine Gael has deepened with the Taoiseach in waiting, Simon Harris, intent on creating a new look party.
The Mirror's front page: killed as they saved lives. Tributes were paid to the victims alongside global condemnation of Israel over the deaths of innocent charity staff as they took food to starving Palestinians.
The Star leads with a likely story, Mago. The show pictures of Kinahan target James Mago Cately's lavish extension at the centre of a court showdown with the Criminal Assets Bureau.
And finally, the Herald goes with Monk scoops in the Sun. Jerry the Monk Hutch has been photographed sipping on a pint at a pub in Lanzarote. Photos show Hutch sitting in a tourist hotspot after his acquittal for the murder of David Byrne at the Regency Hotel in 2016. Now, coming up, we're going to be taking a closer look at some of those stories that are happening in today's papers and online.
But after the break, we're going to hear from teachers home and abroad about their experience of Ireland's teacher shortage crisis. Stay with us for more.
Welcome back. Now, staffing shortages are very high on the agenda today as teachers' unions continue to meet this week. One of the topics is a survey that found that more than half of newly recruited and qualified teachers would consider leaving Ireland to work overseas. Joining us now is someone who has done just that, English teacher Ross Beaton, who joins us now live from Abu Dhabi, and back home, David Waters, President of the Teachers' Union of Ireland, who is in Killarney at their ongoing conference. Good morning to you both. Ross, thank you so much for joining us from Abu Dhabi. But David, can I come to you first of all? Obviously, the TUI conference is going on at the moment. I know Minister for Education Norma Foley is going to speak today. What is the main topic? What is the main issue in this teacher crisis we're hearing so much about?
Yeah, well, I mean, the teacher recruitment crisis is dominating an awful lot. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, the 51% of teachers who'd consider moving abroad is pretty stark. But we've been warning about this for years. This isn't news to us. Only 35% of teachers in our recent survey were offered full-time hours. So, I mean, why wouldn't teachers consider leaving? I mean, the allure of other places is definitely going to be there if you're on a bit-time contract and you don't have a viable work life. I mean, it's kind of farcical how the government aren't doing anything about this. And the unions have come forward with lots of suggestions, but it seems if it costs money, they don't want to know about it, and they're not taking it seriously. And it's outrageous because you have a whole swathe of students who are going to be disadvantaged by this. There's lots of schools now who can't offer subjects like woodwork. They're just gone. You can imagine being a student who might have done it, say, in fifth year, and now you're in sixth year. They don't have a teacher. So, I mean, it's a real problem. And they're not taking it seriously at all.
Well, David, I just think it's so interesting that you say that the government aren't taking it seriously. We'd love to hear from you, 0896 111 111, because we've been talking about education so much over COVID, even before that. But with these teachers not getting offered permanent contracts, and we are hearing of schools that don't have enough teachers. So what's happening there? Why is there this huge disconnect where they're not offering permanent contracts?
Okay, well, there's each school gets an allocation, and there's very little flexibility with this, right? So of allocation for teachers. Now we've three kind of measures which we think would actually help the recruitment and retention crisis, and one is increasing the flexibility that if you're a principal, you can actually offer a teacher, say, if they're an Irish and maths teacher, you can actually offer them a full-time position in those subjects, rather, even though your allocation might only allow you to offer a certain amount of Irish. We think you should have the flexibility and maneuverability to allow you to kind of manipulate that when you get a teacher come in, you can actually give them full-time hours. I think that would secure them in the position, get them embedded in the community, and we would have
What are your other two, David, sorry, what are the other two things that you suggest?
The other two is we think you should have the PME allowance. They're not allowance, PME training course. That's the teacher training. It was 1 year up until about 2014, and they increased it to 2 years. We now have a recruitment and retention crisis. They've increased it to 2 years, the training program, and yet we're using the second year PME students. We're taking them pretty much out of college to fill in the gaps. They're doing huge amounts of sub work in schools anyway. Okay. So if we have that, we'd release 1,400 teachers immediately into the system. So that makes no sense why they're not doing that. I mean, I did it in 1 year, and Minister Foley did it in 1 year. Yeah. So I mean, I don't see why it's suddenly, 2 years.
Yeah.
And quickly, just a third one.
The other one is, and it's relating to Ross. We have been constantly asking the government, I mean, repeatedly, I've raised it with the minister directly, that people need to get what they call incremental credit. So credit for teaching service done in non-EU countries. At the moment, if someone like Ross, who might be teaching 5 or 6 years abroad, if he comes back, he starts on 0.1 of the pay scale. So like, even if you're teaching 10 years abroad, there's no way you're going to come back if you're going to be impoverished when you return. It's just not realistic. I mean, if you look at the terms and conditions they can offer you over there, well, the very least we can do is make sure that when you come back, you can afford to live. And that's, I think, pretty basic.
Well, there's one thing that kept on coming up in your survey as well, and that was access to housing and affordable housing. And that teachers are like, well, I can't afford to live where the school is, so that's not going to happen. Ross, you're living in Abu Dhabi. You're an English teacher. Tell us why you left Ireland.
So I went over to Abu Dhabi in 2019. It was about 5.5 years ago now. I had a friend living over there at the time, and I couldn't get a job here in Ireland. And I said, sure, why not? Go over, do a year, maybe 2 years. The rest is history, as they say. I mean, the appeal was a good odd job opportunity, develop my subject, develop my craft, good professional development, good salary. The benefits on the contract are generally very good. You get housing allowance, you get a flight allowance, you get very good medical insurance, which is the medical care out here is super. Travel, I mean, you can travel at your breaks, at weekends. So the appeal was definitely there. And a lot of people come out here for maybe a year, 2 years, and they stay to 5 to 6 years. In fact, I know people who have left and come back because the appeal was so much better. The lifestyle is so good, and just, the job opportunity and progression. I mean, I started a new school last academic year, and within that first year, I got a promotion to a mid-leader position. So within that quick year, the school are honing in their skills with you. They want you to develop, and they want you to continue as a professional.
So you obviously left, 5 years ago? You've obviously a lot of friends back at home and stuff. Are you constantly bragging about how great life is out there? Like, would you encourage more teachers to do it when we're seeing that 50% of the current recruits that are coming through teaching college are probably going to leave? Can you see it? Can you see what's on offer?
Oh, 100%. And in fact, I just had a voice note this morning from a friend of mine who was in college with me years ago. Like, I'm qualified in 2017. She's 30 now, same as me, and she's coming out in September. She's just like, I want a break. I want to get out. I want to see the world. I want a better, job opportunity, develop my skill, go traveling, get away from the weather. She can't afford to live at home. I mean, if I was to go home to Ireland from Dublin, if I was to get a job in Dublin, my friends and my family are there. I shouldn't have to move away from my home, but I probably would. And that would not be an ideal situation.
Ross, there's no way that we can ever compete with certain advantages that places like Abu Dhabi have. Sunshine. You are with it, you've got the sunshine, you're in a private system where there are very affluent people, rather than the system that we have here, David, which, you've got people teaching in prefabs. We've got buildings that are kind of falling down. So David, are you seeing this as a competition now to try to get retention? Because we're never going to win that competition.
No, you're right. We're not going to win. The government will never be able to afford that. But what they can do is make it remotely attractive. And I mean, this is only going to get worse because the teacher recruitment crisis is international. Okay, so I mean, but we have really sought after graduates. Our teachers are really high quality. So I mean, Ross's friends, that's only going to keep happening because other jurisdictions are going to want our teachers. They're going to start taking them. So we have to look at this realistically. We need to make the job attractive. I mean, in our survey, the bureaucratization of the profession is really dragging people down. And as Ross mentioned, he got into a mid-leadership position. I mean, the posts of responsibility in this country are far below what they used to be pre-austerity. I mean, schools are kind of still in austerity mode, which is part of the problem. I mean, if we have a proper career structure, you might find more teachers are willing to stay because they can actually see a path forward for themselves. So, I mean, there's lots of things that can be done, but the government are refusing, unfortunately.
What do you make of the Minister for Education and what she has done in her role since she's been in place, Norma Foley?
Well, look, it's a wide question, but unfortunately, the TUI have had lots of issues. I mean, particularly around consultation at the start of the new senior cycle, with the recruitment and retention crisis. I mean, I don't know what planet, to be honest with you, sometimes she's on with this because it is dire. Like, I mean, my own school, which in Dublin, can't offer woodwork anymore because we can't get a teacher, and it's a deaf school. You know, we don't want the disadvantage to be even more disadvantaged, and I think that's happening. Post responsibility, we welcome what she's brought in, but she is still well short of the mark. I mean, there's so much that can be done. The workload for teachers is astronomical at the moment, and they just want to keep piling on more and more with no allowance or no respect for the teacher on the ground.
And we do completely understand that. We have a statement from the Department of Education. It's a lengthy statement, but basically they've said while schools in certain locations are experiencing challenges in recruiting teachers and obtaining substitute teachers, the vast majority of sanctioned teacher positions are filled. The rate of resignation retirement is very low by any standard, consistent with previous years. They've also said that teaching remains an attractive profession and that they are putting in place a budget to keep teachers and upskilling and give better pay. Quickly, Ross, one answer. Are you going to come home anytime soon? Or one word, yes or no?
No.
My mother's watching this. I know she is. And she knows the answer at this stage. People just don't ask me anymore, but it is the $1 million question. But no, definitely not in the short term, as things are going well.
I can understand for your mother and your family, heartbreaking as well, that is. David Walters from the TUI, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And Ross Beaton, living out in Abu Dhabi, English teacher out there. Fair play to you for joining us.
Thanks so much, guys. Coming
Thanks,
up,
guys.
We'd love to hear from you. 0896 111 111. Coming up, we're going to get the latest on Minister Simon Coveney's departure and the rest of today's headlines.
See you after the break.
Welcome back. Joining us now to go through some of the stories from this morning's papers and online is Jack Horgan-Jones, political correspondent from the Irish Times. Good morning, Jack. Morning. Lovely to have you here. And then we were all waiting for the push notifications yesterday. It's all about Fine Gael these days, isn't it? Simon Coveney is the latest one to have a bit of news.
Yeah, another bites the dust. So Simon Coveney in Cabinet for 13 years, but only now until next week. He rang up Simon Harris, the Fine Gael leader, who will become Taoiseach next Tuesday, yesterday, and told him, look, you know, my race is run, I'm stepping down. And there had been some speculation that if he didn't jump, he would have been pushed because the need has been for Simon Harris to create enough room around the cabinet table on the Fine Gael side to appoint new people and to kind of refresh and overhaul that party's frontline team.
Sometimes when people do that, and I understand it, it's like you need to refresh the cabinet, but sometimes is it to the detriment of the country, of the people and the jobs that people do? He's highly respected in what he does. He did a lot for Brexit. You know, it's kind of like, are you getting rid of everyone and you're going to be bringing in someone that we don't know and they don't have a proven track record? Yeah,
these things can feel really weird, particularly when it is someone who is not only a household name in his own right and ran for the leadership of Fine Gael in 2017, unsuccessfully against Leo Varadkar, but is part of a kind of wider political and business dynasty. You know, his father, Hugh Coveney, was a TD. Simon succeeded him after his death in a by-election. The brother Patrick is a well-known businessman. The other brother, Rory Coveney, was involved out in RTE for some time, stepped down, arising from the controversies last year. So, he's a household name, so it will be weird to see him step aside. But I think this is part of the process of politics,
This is what you got to do.
Generational change, and 13 years around the cabinet table, there have been charges that Fine Gael has been jaded and stale and just needs that shot of energy. And there is also pressure coming from below. Talking to a lot of people off the record, once Leo Varadkar decided that he wasn't standing, they were saying now is the time to change the faces around the cabinet table. Now is the time for that process of renewal.
To keep people motivated and to think that they have an opportunity of coming up through the ranks. And listen, Simon
nothing
Coveney
is static,
has had a good career in politics. I would imagine he'll go into the private sector and could do quite well.
Or to Europe.
As
MEP
the Examiner
was reporting this morning.
If he was going for, Cork, if he's going for Munster,
if he's going for Munster, they'd have a little problem
because
their ticket is decided down there. But what they could do is drop the former Bord Gáis CEO, John Mullins, who was the kind of Cork candidate on the ticket, run him in Cork East next time out in the general election.
And Sean Kelly
run Coveney, and then you might get Kelly and Coveney in Ireland South for Fine Gael, which would not be a bad return for them.
Not complicated at all. Listen, all the best to him on that one. Let's move on to another story. It's on the front of the Irish Times this morning. Irish Defence Forces have been training Libyan soldiers, but who are the people that they're training? Sorry.
Yes, so these are basically a small factional private army that work for a Libyan a warlord called Khalifa Haftar.
Okay.
This guy last popped up on our radars when he bought a former Irish Defence Forces ship in 2017, 2018, which was very embarrassing for the government, but I suspect not quite as embarrassing as this story by my colleagues Naomi O'Leary and Conor Gallagher on the front of the Irish Times today, which outlines how a group of former Irish soldiers, including Special Forces soldiers who would have worked for or served in the Army Ranger Wing, have gone private sector. Nothing wrong with that after retiring from the Defence Forces, but set up this company, Irish Training Solutions, and are kind of training a Special Forces equivalent, it looks like, over in Libya as part of this messy, factionalised, dirty war that's going on over there.
Is this against UN law or something, though? Because I'd imagine this company, these guys, they go and train multiple different armies and whatever else because they're very highly trained themselves.
So there is a UN arms embargo on Libya, which is in place since 2011. And actually the ultimate sale of that ship that I mentioned before was found to be in breach of that arms embargo. And it does appear on the face of it that this is an apparent breach as well of that arms embargo, not necessarily through the supply of guns and bullets, but through the supply of services, of other military material. Apparently, there's a suggestion that helmets and body armour and stuff like that was provided. But I think from an Irish point of view, it's very embarrassing, not only because these former guys were involved, but also because at least it seems one serving Irish soldier was over there doing this, providing the training, but also that this seems to have been a kind of exit route for several other people who are just on their way out of the Defence Forces. The guards have been on, they've said that there doesn't seem to be any breach of Irish criminal law. I suppose there's a question as to whether there's a breach or a potential breach of Irish military law, but obviously that only applies to those people who are actually serving in the Irish military.
Private, so they can...
They're private, exactly. But the point is as well that there's footage of one of these guys wearing, several of these guys wearing tricolours, wearing the Army Ranger Wing badge as well. So there's a huge reputational cost there. There's a potential kind of blowback as well because people may see these people in action in Libya and think that they are the Irish Army. They're wearing things that look very like the Irish Army.
And Khalifa Haftar, he is associated with Wenger, the
Wagner
group.
The Wagner group,
this kind of... the Russian paramilitary group that were brought in by Putin in Ukraine.
Yeah,
and they're kind of doing stuff all over Africa.
Yeah, there's a remarkable line in there in the reporting as well, which... at some point, apparently, there was an exchange of fire between this Irish group and the Wagner group. The Wagner group, the Russian kind of super mercenary team who saw them as a potential rival for military contracts and took pot shots at them. Apparently, at one point, there's fire return from the Irish side. So it's a remarkable story, and I think that we'll be dealing with the outworkings of this for a couple of days, just as the military and political system tries to kind of wrap its head around it here and figure out, is there anything that can be done, or do you just have to stand by and watch this happen?
Fair play to Naomi and Conor for coming up with that story. Amazing work by them.
You have to read it. It's jaw-dropping. Every paragraph is jaw-dropping.
Can I quickly just touch on, mean, this is probably shouldn't say this. Speaking of pot shots, but this is the basketball playoff.
Yeah.
So there's a match between the Portlaoise Panthers and Limerick Sport Eagles. Portlaoise lost 80 points to 78, but there was something wrong with the rules, so they're going back to play. 0.3 seconds is left on the shot clock in this quarter-final.
Do something in 0.3 seconds.
So Limerick win this with free throws at the very death, which is then objected to by Portlaoise, arguing that the foul should not have stood. The entire thing is cancelled then and ordered for a rematch.
For 0.3.
Only for that decision then to be reversed, and rather than a full rematch be played, 0.3 seconds to be replayed at some point.
So I wonder, are they all going to get togged
happen?
out and then they just go and have a pot shot?
Like I don't know. Does the ball have to go dead after then? So do they get a final play after?
Where
0.3
does this go in sport? Like I think
no
the
idea.
Glen Kilmacud Crokes years gone by, there was too many people on the pitch. Like, did they start replaying
They're
matches?
replaying 0.3 seconds of a match.
Brilliant.
Best of luck, Limerick. 0.3 seconds. A lot of things Limerick people can do in 0.3 seconds.
Is there any other sport you'd like
so
the last play to be replayed? Jack Horgan-Jones from the Irish Times. Great to have you
Thank
with
you
us.
so much. Now it's over to Alan. What's coming up after the break, Al?
Yes, guys, we are going to be chatting all things toilet etiquette, the things that you do and you don't in the bathroom, especially if you're at work. That's coming up after the break.
Hello, welcome back. Now it's time for some hard talk. It is toilet talk. Almost 50% of people suffer from something called toilet anxiety, especially in the workplace.
And today we're speaking to a man who has made the study of people's toilet habits part of his work. Live from Melbourne in Australia is clinical psychologist Dr. Simon Knowles. Good morning to you, Simon. Great to chat to you because we have been fascinated by this here all morning. So people actually do suffer from toilet anxiety. Tell us why.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me on your show. Look, this is something that, we all go to the toilet. We all need to go to the toilet, but it also is something that can be commonly associated with anxiety. And there are a number of reasons for that. There are cultural and social factors. So, for example, for many cultures, there's a taboo around talking about body functions, how they relate to using the toilet. And from a young age, we're taught that discussing topics such as toilets and toilet habits can be impolite and inappropriate. So as a result, people may feel embarrassed and uncomfortable about using toilets or having conversations about this.
So can you talk to us about why people experience toilet anxiety acutely in the workplace?
I can. So when we think about the workplace, we're often trying to put our best foot forward, right? It's a professional setting where discussions around body functions are considered inappropriate or taboo. And at work, again, we try and present our best to others. For example, we dress well, we look well, and, we want to try to avoid taboo topics. But because of this potential increased scrutiny, if we're using a restroom, it can, because we're not necessarily around people like our intimate relationships, our partners or friends or family, it's work colleagues. And so there can be increased anxiety around that. That can include privacy concerns. So there's shared workspaces. So there's increased consciousness about one's own body functions being heard or noticed by colleagues, potential lack of privacy. There can be a fear of judgment by others. And there are other potential factors, such as past negative experiences, accessibility difficulties, and cultural or religious reasons as well. And the other thing I'd point out is there's also time constraints. So, for example, in your work, if there's a break and you need to get to the toilet quickly, you've got to quickly go to the toilet and come back. And again, there can feel pressure to do that. But we also need to recognise that around 4 in 10 individuals live with a chronic gastrointestinal condition, which means they might need to use the toilet more frequently. It also might mean that they need to spend more time in a restroom. And all of that can increase potential anxiety for people who are needing to go to a toilet.
I'm just reading here, like even in a study in the UK where over half of people at work held their poo or urine because they felt too embarrassed. Like, surely that can't be good for you. Can you give us other examples of things like that that people are doing?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So it's not uncommon for people to feel like they need to go, but they will delay in order to not go to the toilet. So my work is working with people who have chronic gastrointestinal conditions, and so they often have to go to the toilet. But in work situations, that can be quite confronting because, again, they're surrounded by other people and they might feel uncomfortable about doing that. And so as a result, one of the things that they will typically do is go across the road to a shopping centre or somewhere else because...
So they leave their workplace?
Going to the toilet, absolutely. Yes, because it's too confronting.
100%. I totally understand that. Like here at work, even there's the poo toilet. You can smell it. There's one place that people, but there is. I'm sorry, but there is, and that's where people seem to go. Not looking at anyone in particular in this room, but and people talk,
and that's a good point.
But you've done stuff about people who are happy to chat to other people when they're on the loo.
Yes. So one of the interesting findings that I found was that. One of the things I want to say that you mentioned before is about using toilets is that 58% engaged in activity to reduce the sound or smells when using a toilet.
Oh, yes.
So that's one of the other interesting facts.
Yeah. Because if there's a couple of cubicles together, and there might be, you don't want to hear the plop.
Now,
well, you
don't.
You don't. Sorry, excuse me.
How many of you also go into the restroom with your phone? 51% identified that they would use a smartphone while using a public restroom. 43% would engage in social media. 25% would read or answer emails. And one of the things that I find most surprising is that there was around 6% who would actually be making calls. On their phone.
I've actually heard that people talking at full voice.
I've heard it.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
No, I've never made.
Oh, come on! If it's your partner and they're ringing about something about the kids, you'll pick up the phone when you're on the toilet, wouldn't you? Oh, we're having big, strong reactions in the studio.
Not in a shopping centre.
We need to put up a poll about this. I've got one person saying yes, everyone else saying no behind here. I'll tell you who's saying yes. He normally sits behind me on the couch. 0896 111 111. Would you answer the phone?
Simon, can we ask you then, we're going to look at some pictures in a second, but at home, are people more relaxed about that, or does that still carry through? Does that anxiety still carry through at home where you would be having an anxiety to go to the loo in front of your partner?
Yes, absolutely. I've seen clients whereby even going to a restroom or going to the toilet in the family home can be a place of significant anxiety. So again, sometimes that family members are having to leave the home, or they'll leave the home in order to go to the toilet. So it can be, for some individuals, it can have a huge impact upon their quality of life.
Yeah, it certainly can, and we know there's huge issues with gut issues. But can we look at some configurations? The first picture here, this is all 3 stalls in a workplace. Now, you found out which one are people most likely to pick? See the exit sign and then A, B and C.
So you're showing a picture here of a study I did where I asked an anonymous group of participants to complete a series of vignettes, and there's a series of pictures. In this case, we've got 3 toilet stalls. And they had to identify whether they would use a toilet, and if so, which one, or due to anxiety, leave and go home, or due to fear of contamination, go home, or the other is come back when it's free. But
so which one have they used?
So what I found was that just under 50% would use toilet C.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Do we know why?
Okay, so one of the reasons is furthest from the exit, which is likely to mean that it's a more private location, and also you're not going to be influenced by traffic around you, people moving around you.
Where people are coming in and out the door.
100%.
Exactly.
Listen,
Quickly.
Yes.
Okay, if stall A was unavailable and you only had 2, which one would they still go to the furthest one?
C.
Still go to C?
Yeah, that's correct. So in this case,
Yeah.
around just under 70% would use toilet C, and about 9% would use
Because you
toilet
literally,
B.
you don't want to go to that one beside somebody and hear their stuff going on. You really don't.
In the final one, A and C is gone. Only B is there. Do people use it or do they
Leave.
hold it? Do they leave?
Right. Well, 11% automatically leave and go home to use their own toilet. We have about 5% who will leave and come back to use the toilets when they're empty.
Yeah.
And then we have just under 10%, and I think this is interesting to identify, is that 10% will leave the toilets and go to the disabled toilets. So we're seeing people increasingly, when there are less toilets available, use the disabled toilets. So that means it's less opportunity for people who might need to use them.
Well, you do an awful lot of work with the gut health, and people can find you online. Dr. Simon Knowles, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.
Time now to take a look at this morning's paper, starting with the Irish Times. The headline: former Irish soldiers trained rogue generals' forces in Libya. The Irish Times report that an Offaly-based company founded by Irish veterans recruited departing and former members of the Army Rangers Wing and Defence Forces to train the rogue army of a Libyan general.
€1,200 gap between cheapest and most expensive creches. That's the front page of the Indo. Parents living in South Dublin pay the highest monthly fees in the country for creches. That's €1,200 more than the lowest price county. That's according to a special investigation.
The Examiner's front page: Coveney could mount bid for Europe. Speculation is increasing that Simon Coveney could run in the upcoming European elections following his decision to step down from Cabinet next week.
Fresh crisis in Fine Gael as Coveney quits. That's the top story on the Daily Mail. They say crisis in Fine Gael has deepened with the Taoiseach in waiting, Simon Harris, intent on creating a new look party.
The Mirror's front page: killed as they saved lives. Tributes were paid to the victims alongside global condemnation of Israel over the deaths of innocent charity staff as they took food to starving Palestinians.
The Star leads with a likely story, Mago. The show pictures of Kinahan target James Mago Gately's lavish extension at the centre of a court showdown with the Criminal Assets Bureau.
And finally, the Herald's front page: Monk scoops in the Sun. Jerry the Monk Hutch has been photographed sipping on a pint at a pub in Lanzarote. Photos show Hutch sitting in a tourist hotspot after his acquittal for the murder of David Byrne at the Regency Hotel in 2016.
There you have it now, and a number of the topics we've been discussing this morning.
Yes.
Teachers were in 7:15, we're discussing that.
Yeah, we were talking to the president of the Teachers Union of Ireland, who are holding their conference in Killarney at the minute, and there's a survey there that over half of teachers who are newly qualified and ready to be deployed are going to leave the country because they can't afford to stay here and they want to go somewhere else.
And you're talking to, where was he, Dubai?
In Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi.
Yeah.
And he said he'd
With
no
Ross.
plans to come home.
No, and just said, listen, the teaching conditions out there are amazing. They get accommodation, budgets, and the sunshine. Orla, listen, they get well paid, the teachers here in Ireland. Obviously, it's difficult, though, to live in Dublin like so many other careers. Orla just said, what other professions approve career breaks nowadays? That's something else that teachers get. I worked in the financial industry, and if you wanted a career break, you had to resign.
There you go. Sarah says, my son is in second year and he has at least 25% free classes every week because teachers are absent, covering other classes, or teachers are sharing classes. This is disgraceful in my eyes. Kids are losing out, and that will not be taken into consideration when sitting their exams.
Do you think if teachers get trained in Ireland, they should serve a mandatory 5 years at least?
Probably, isn't it?
But isn't that what we were talking about when it comes to medical professionals as well? It's like, do we have to say, well, now, if you become a nurse in Ireland, you have to give us 5 years, a doctor,
Probably,
whatever.
yeah, I think so.
Well, if you can't afford to live, well, if you're going, OK, so if you pay my rent in an area that I've got a school, then fine, I'll stay. But if you go, you've got to spend 5 years here, but I can't afford to live near the school. This is all tied up in housing. And that's what they say over and over again. Everything that's brought up is we can't afford to live where the school is.
Listen, it's the same. So many jobs, private and
they're all
public
leaving.
sector as well.
Construction workers are all leaving, That's it. Anyway,
thank you for sending your text.
It's all in the loo.
We were talking about
It's
toilet
all gone down the loo.
etiquette.
It's all gone down the
Here's
toilet.
some stats. 36% of people report scrunching their toilet paper. 58% said they would talk to their partner when they're using a toilet, and 68% said that they would be happy to talk to a friend while they're both in the toilets using separate cubicles. So we thought we'd chat about that.
But there was also a
Did you
thing
pick up the phone?
where over 50% of people in work wouldn't go into a toilet if they thought somebody else was going to be there, or they'd hold it, or the sort of, there is a bit of a toilet etiquette there.
So would you answer the phone if you're on the toilet?
No.
Would you not?
No.
Noreen
at
said...
home I would. But I wouldn't have my phone in the toilet with me at home.
You wouldn't have...
You wouldn't?
Did you not go on your phone whenever you're in the toilet? No?
Probably not, no.
Noreen said would never answer the phone in the toilet. Disgusting. Imagine the germs, yuck. I thought that all men just go to the toilet just to get a bit of peace and quiet to go on their phone.
We only have one loo in our house, so when I go into the toilet, I put on my podcasts or my book.
How long are you in there?
So Phil knows.
If I'm doing anything, if I'm doing a shower, I've got my speaker, I've got my shower speaker, I've got all that set up.
Want to ask you on this. So hold up your camera on the QR code. Would you answer the phone while on the toilet?
Well, at home, maybe. But if you're in a hotel or in a restaurant and you're sitting there and there's a few cubicles, other people are there, are you going to literally have a full-scale conversation with somebody?
No, I wouldn't do that. But if you're at home, potentially.
You're at home and your wife is calling about something. Hello, how are you?
Like you with your music, Carla said, my partner plays Oasis every time he's going for a number 2. Every time I hear the song coming from upstairs, I know not to venture up. It's ruined Oasis for me, to be honest.
What's he listening to? The Master Plan, Live Forever.
I'm more of a Blur. Number 2.
Okay, give us the QR code at 0896 111.
Would you answer 37? Oh, 49. Oh, we're a lot of
Okay, listen, we'll get back to that. Listen, always highbrow here on Ireland AM. We'll be back with you in just a minute.
Good morning, you're very welcome back. Now we are joined by a very familiar face on the couch. It is Virgin Media News anchor Caroline Twohig. Good morning to you, Caroline.
Good morning.
Hello. It's lovely to see you.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Because you have been, there's been a lot going on in your life. 2 babies in quick succession.
Yes, just a little bit.
Just a little bit. You're on maternity leave now.
Yes.
Baby Roisin, how is she?
She's great. She's 4 months, so I've been up since 4, feeding her. So it's not a shock to the system to come in. So I think Ireland AM has been amazing training for parenthood, I would say. You're used to being up at 4 a.m. with the feeds and stuff, so yeah.
Well, because you started off here as well.
I did. I read the news here for a good few years, and the AMs never got easier, I have to say. Being in for 4 was always a bit of a shock to the system, but loved my time on AM.
Yeah.
Loved it. It's lovely to be back.
But it is the sort of thing that nothing can prepare you for parenthood.
Yes.
It's just not a thing that can happen. And even though you're a mother and your body is changing, because your first baby, Sean, gorgeous baby, born during COVID, but things didn't go as you thought they would. It was a complete shock to your system. What happened?
Yeah, so unfortunately, immediately after Sean was born, I started to feel very down, in shock a little bit, didn't really know what was going on. But before that felt really ready to be a parent. I was married, I was very fortunate, had a great supportive partner, a home, good jobs. And we were ready for this. I felt really like this is going to complete my life, picture perfect, Instagram family. And as soon as he was born, I just felt like something really bad had happened. So I think there might have been a bit of PTSD there, like a lot of women experience immediately after delivery. But it just got worse and worse. And looking back now, I can see that postnatal depression had set in very quickly, and it just got worse when I got home and over the months, and up to a year really before I did anything about it. Things just got worse and worse.
So, because you've spoken a bit about anxiety, and I'm sure at the time you weren't too sure exactly what was wrong with you and what your feelings were. Looking back on it now, it was postnatal anxiety, depression.
Yeah.
why? What was your thoughts of postnatal depression at the time?
I think I had a very bad perception of what postnatal depression was. I don't really know, what I thought about it, but I did not want to associate it with it in any way. All I knew was it's not me, it's not what I want. I couldn't say the words. I wouldn't even admit to myself that I had it. And very unlike me, didn't talk to anybody, including my sisters and my mum, which then I knew this is not you.
So it was kind of taboo.
It was taboo. There was a really dark cloud around it. And I thought maybe people who didn't want kids or weren't cut out for motherhood would have got postnatal. And that's a terrible thing to think. But I had a really bad perception, could not speak about it and felt so much shame around it.
But let's be honest, you're not alone thinking that's for others. That's for people who don't want a baby. I want this baby. What things were you experiencing, Caroline?
So just on a day-to-day basis, it would have been exhaustion, brain fog, fatigue, so much so that your bones ached. And I know, like, women recovering from a delivery have a lot of physical symptoms, but this went on for months when I should have been fully recovered. Rage, just complete exhaustion all the time, very emotional, crying every single day, and just feelings of, when you did get some sleep, when you were lucky enough to get some sleep, not wanting to wake up. And that's not right. Like, that was not. And then constant guilt for not enjoying this perfect, healthy baby that you're lucky enough to have. So the guilt kind of impounded everything and just made me feel so bad that I couldn't speak about it.
Did you feel, though, that you weren't bonding with Sean?
I did at the time.
Which, as a mother, I'm sure... That's, because there's so much expectation.
Yes.
And then when you feel, like, even though you were bonding with him, you feel that you weren't.
I thought I was going to have this explosion of love the minute I held him in my arms and that everything was going to fall into place. And instead, I was in a lot of pain and I didn't know what to do and I was in shock. And that just got worse. So the guilt from that of I'm not bonding with my baby, I didn't feel that explosion of love, I'm a terrible person, I'm a terrible mother. Looking back now, I can see I was bonding with my baby. I was doing everything with him 24/7, but it was never enough in my head. You were constantly feeling like a failure. I was out walking with him 3 times a day. I was making all his meals. I was feeding him, doing tummy time, doing story time. But it was never enough. And I just felt like I was the worst person in the world. And now I know that that was a hormonal imbalance, something quite simple, and it's down to science. But at the time, and if it had gone on, it just would have got worse. It's such a shame that I missed that joy for myself. He was being tended to, he was fine, but I was rock bottom, and I'm sure a lot of other women are.
I'm sure there's people who are watching this at home right now that are understanding what you're saying. They don't know why. Caroline, this is all happening to you. It's your first experience of being a mother. And your partner's there, and of course he's trying to make everything better, as men try to do. What happened to make you go, okay, there's something up? What made you realise?
So 2 interventions, I suppose. In between lockdowns, I saw 2 friends, and both times I was very upset, as I was every day. But because of lockdowns, I couldn't see people much. And they kind of contacted each other to say, she's not okay. What'll we do? They contacted me together and said, look, we're here for you. Would you consider going to your doctor? And I was like, what? No, absolutely not. I'm busy looking after my baby. Couldn't possibly look after myself. And then I met a stranger in the park who probably saw something in me that she recognised in herself. She had 2 children. And she said, how are you getting on with your baby? And just the vacant look. At this stage, I was numb. I had stopped crying. And the vacant look in she just reached out and touched my hand and said, I found it very, very tough. And I went to my doctor and he put me on medication. And medication to me was a dirty word. I was almost shocked that she's speaking about this thing that we do not talk about. And she gave me her number and said, just please. And it took a stranger, because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. Didn't want to disappoint my family, my friends, that, oh, she has a healthy baby, she should be. That was in my head. And eventually, after nearly a year of feeling like this, I went to my GP, who was amazing.
Wow. It's a stranger to reach out like that. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I still have her number in my phone. Like, I've thanked her numerous times.
Amazing,
But my GP was amazing then in the end. He recognised it immediately as well.
And gave you medication.
Yes.
Of course, it took you a little bit of time before you took the medication as well, because it's a mental barrier. And as you said, it was like a bad word almost.
Yeah.
But what difference did it make?
I want to say immediate, but it took a few different dosage tries, just because your physical makeup, like you may be deficient in vitamins, you may need more than the other, and I needed to increase the dosage a couple of times, which was another taboo for me. But it worked very quickly, and I started just to feel like myself again. There was no side effects of, feeling drowsy or feeling different or feeling like putting on weight or anything like that. I just felt like, oh God, I'm not actually the worst person in the world. And I started to laugh. I hadn't laughed in a long time.
Wow.
I was just feeling a bit of joy again and just back to myself. Like, that's all it was. It doesn't fix everything. If you had hormonal bouts throughout the month, like a lot of women do, you'd still get them. It just helped me get back to myself. Stresses and all, just back to myself. And it was a gift, really. So I could enjoy them again,
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
It was life-changing.
Absolutely life-changing. And such a simple thing that I was stopping myself from getting help that I needed. As my GP explained, you can't meditate your way out of a broken leg. Sometimes you need medical intervention. I have a vitamin deficiency. He said you get injections for that. You have a hormone imbalance. You just need medical intervention.
I'm sure you and your partner questioned whether you were ever going to have another child again, but you did then, and you've little baby Roisin, gone for number 2 again. But listen, and things have worked out well this time. You're in a great place. And look at that, little Sean and Roisin.
Yeah, they're
best
little
of pals.
Best of pals. And thankfully this time I just felt so much more supported because I got through it the last time, and it was all down to me. The support was always there, but in my head I knew, okay, there's avenues for help. And just for any woman who's sitting at home feeling like that, there's so many avenues for help. It's not shameful to feel this way. It's probably down to a chemical or hormonal imbalance. We talk about HRT for menopause. It's the same thing. You're going through all the same symptoms, except you have to look after a tiny new human and recover from whatever delivery you had. So just go and talk to somebody, preferably your GP, who can put you on. It might not be medication for everybody, but for some people, it's just the right thing, and it really helps.
It's just so lovely to see you smile, and I can imagine how hard it's been to go, okay, I'm going to talk about this. Because you didn't hear people talking about this beforehand.
It took me 3 years, to be honest. And my friend started a podcast, High Performance Woman, and she asked me on, and I was flattered. And I said, I'm going to be honest with her. She asked me about anxiety. And then when it came to, and then how did your life change when baby came? And I spilled, and the reaction to it was so amazing, heartwarming and huge that I thought I don't think this has been spoke about.
Good on you, because listen, and we talk, as you mentioned, about menopause so much, but something like this actually doesn't get a huge amount of airtime. So you coming on here and speaking about it is really, really important. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Caroline Twohig, of course, Virgin
Don't go
Media.
past the newsroom, because they'll make you do a shift.
Going to get a coffee and go
straight home.
Straight
home, exactly.
Straight home. A
Great
pleasure to see you, Caroline.
Thanks
Thank you
so much.
so much. Thank you so much.
Now, Easter might be over, but the kids can still get involved in the kitchen with some family fun recipes.
Yes, using all the lovely leftovers, Paul Knapp joins us now to make his hot cross bun bread and butter pudding. Good morning to you, Paul.
Good morning, guys. How are we getting on?
This is delicious because it's bread and butter pudding with a twist, with chocolate, cream, custard. We have everything here. It's beautiful.
You know, I'm giving you all the accompaniments with it as well. And I suppose, like you said there, what you hit the nail on the head. Traditionally, bread and butter pudding, you'd be using kind of the stale bread. You make kind of an egg custard, infuse that with some vanilla. So we're using the hot cross bun. So a lot of the heavy lifting on the flavour's been done already for us. Do you know what I mean? By courtesy of the people.
It's all in there,
It's all in there, so it's a nice cheat. And as we said earlier on, if you don't have any of these, if they're like lurking in the cupboard that have gone stale, they're really reduced. I think last year I finished up around about Easter time, popped into a supermarket, and they were doing bags of these, like 4 in a bag for like 50 cent. They for next to nothing. Do you know what I mean? They were significantly reduced. Absolutely.
Like the Easter eggs.
Absolutely. Again, and that's what we're using here.
Price,
Absolutely. So we've got Easter eggs, which we should have some left over. I'm sure there's plenty left in the Bow household, is there? After
No way.
No.
None left over.
Well and truly gone.
Really?
Kids or the parents? Yeah, right.
Polished off.
Yeah.
And me.
So what we're using is all the recipes up on Dial M Days Facebook page as well as the Virgin Media One's website, all right? So what we've got is we've got hot cross buns, and all we've done is literally we just cut them in half and we just buttered them. So all this is vegan, plant-based. So it's a plant-based butter, and I've just lined the dish here with some butter.
Why do you have to butter them?
just because it just adds that extra fat, indulgence and stuff like that, all right?
It's bread and butter pudding.
It's bread and butter pudding. Otherwise, it'd just be a bread pudding.
It was just a bread pudding if you didn't butter it.
All right.
The clue is in the name of the dish, all right? All right, so we've got a bread and butter pudding with bread and butter, okay, and with hot cross buns. So what we've got is we've got 6 hot cross buns, and I put the bases in there first of all, okay? And what we've got is we've got our Easter eggs. So all I've done is just taken them, a fistful of Easter eggs, crushed them up.
There's no chocolate in that. There's bread, butter, chocolate pudding.
Yeah. And then we're going to put some of that in there like so, okay? So just use up our leftover Easter eggs, and there's the rest of them. You can slide and eat them and keep you happy and keep you quiet.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so what we do now, traditionally...
They're not vegan, I presume?
They are, indeed. Everything is dairy-free. Absolutely.
Everything's vegan?
Yep, everything is, yep. Everything you see here. So what we do, traditionally...
Even the hot cross buns?
Yes, yep. You have to check on some of them just to make sure, but these ones definitely are, because I've checked the ingredients.
Are vegan Easter eggs more expensive? They would be, would they?
They would be a little bit more. It's more the marketing side of things. I think they put the price up on certain things. Do you know what I mean? They put the V word in front of it, and then they think automatically, like organic and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, so it is. But you can get them now for next to nothing. Yeah. So now we need to concentrate on making what would be traditionally the egg kind of a custard. So it's a dairy-free and egg-free. So what we're using is we've got 400 mils of a plant-based milk, which just goes into a little food processor because we're going to blitz it together. So we're trying to recreate that kind of, you know, like creme brulee kind of set, kind of a custard. Okay, yeah. So we're putting into that 85 grams of brown sugar goes in here as well. You can use any type of sugar, I just brown sugar because I had it. I'm just infusing it with some vanilla, and I put a couple of drops of orange oil in there as well, okay? And I'm putting in there 65 grams of a melted butter. That just adds the fat consistency to that.
What are you making here, Paul?
This is like the egg custard. So traditionally it would be bread and butter, and then you'd make like an egg custard. You'd pour it into that, you'd soak it over for like 20 minits or so, and then you bake it and it sets, all right? So then the secret ingredient that's gone into that you haven't realised is there's 250 grams of silken tofu.
Oh!
Too late, he's eating it all. He's eating it all and I didn't tell him. Okay, so what that does is you can use that in savouries and you can use that in sweet desserts as well. And that adds to that just adds as like the thickener to make it like that kind of, that almost like set custard. And then I'm going to pop in there is 2 tablespoons of corn flour. So once that starts to cook, it starts to thicken and starts to set. And all we do is we quickly just bring that all together in a food processor like so. 2 seconds here. So what's that's created? That has now created a custard as such, for want of a better word. So when heat is applied to this, the corn flour is going to thicken the dish, and because we've got the tofu and the butter in there as well, it's going to make it kind of really buttery and really thick. So half of this...
If I wasn't going to have the silken tofu and...
Traditionally, you'd have like eggs, sugar and milk.
Egg, sugar, milk.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to put in the zest of an orange goes in here as well. Okay, and just give that a quick little stir up too. I don't want to blitz the orange zest in there. I just want to add that into after just to infuse it.
Why is that?
Just because otherwise it just go all puree and just go all mushy and stuff like that. So I want those bits in there. So I'm going to pour half of my mixture on top like this, okay, just first of all, before I put the tops on. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to bang on my top. So what I'm making is like a hot cross bun chocolate sandwich, okay?
Right.
I'm just going to press down like so. And then what we do is realistically, I'm going to pour the rest of this custard on there, but realistically you want this to kind of soak for probably 20 minutes or half hour, okay?
Soak right into the hot cross buns.
Absolutely. With bread, it soaks in a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But with these, because they're a baked product, then it just takes that little bit longer. All we do, preset your oven to 160, gas mark 3, and we bang those into the oven like so. They will go in for about 30 minutes, okay? Yeah, and then what we get is we get these. These are hot. So as we said there, okay?
Look at that. Wow.
So you can see even the way that it's split. That's the corn flour, that's the tofu. That's what's set as like your egg kind of a custard. So you've got all that there. Lovely. And then what we do is we're just going to finish this off with a little bit of either marmalade or apricot jam. Right. So all we do is we just paint that on top of there like that, and it just acts as a glaze. Okay. So it gives it like that nice shine on top of our hot cross bun, and a little bit more sugar just in case there isn't enough sugar in this dish in the first place. Okay?
And would you put it back into the oven again with that?
No, you can just leave it like leave it like that. That will just actually just melt a little bit more.
That looks gorgeous.
Yeah, so it's a lovely little dish, and because it's kind of portioned in the bun size, you get your individual portions.
Come on, whip one out, because people would want to see that now coming out like that. Look at that.
So all we do is we take this out like so.
Oh, that's wobbly.
That's what you want.
Yeah.
You want
Look
that
at
like
that.
that. And then what we've got is we've got kind of our eggy custard. We've got all that lovely melted
that
there.
inside,
and
yeah.
you can serve that then with either an ice cream. You can serve that. I've given you ice cream, I've given you cream, and I've given you custard, all of which are plant-based. Oh, that just fell
All
off there.
plant-based, and it's all good.
But mine's all finished.
It's all finished.
So
It just so
after,
happens here's one we prepared earlier.
after
for you.
Alan called you boring last week, Paul, I think you absolutely redeemed
We're going to keep this going, are we?
Thank you so much.
Paul,
That was
thank you
delicious.
so
You're more than
much.
welcome,
Thank
guys.
you
Cheers.
for
Thanks very
fighting
much.
And just say
chef there.
vegan chocolate's good.
Yeah.
Hey, Rodden, how about
Now,
it?
still to come, Derek's making a racket in Cork. He's playing paddle.
Yeah, we'll see you after the break. Good morning, you're very welcome back. Now, Deric has been in the Rebel County this morning taking on the latest celebrity sporting trend.
Celebrity sporting.
Beckham,
Isn't it just
Messi,
people playing
they
it?
all do it, yeah, it's big.
Right. He's trying paddle. Tennis.
Yeah. Deric, how are you getting on?
Absolutely, guys. So look, we'll give anything a go. Anyway, welcome down here to County Cork this morning. We're just outside Carrigtwohig here on the N25, the home of paddle tennis. And we're saying good morning to Mark and Grace. Good morning to you guys.
Morning,
Good
Derek.
morning. And Mark, we'll start with you because this facility is up and running since November and it's already chock-a-block.
Yeah, it is. So we opened on the 4th of November. We had a 10-week soft launch and our grand opening was in the middle of January. So after 5 months, we've already had 11,000 unique visitors. If you include the repeats, we're at about 20,000. We've about 1,000 paddle players a week here.
Now, tell us about the sport itself. Where did paddle tennis originate from?
So paddle started in Mexico in the 60s and then it went to Spain shortly after that. Pretty much what you see around us now is what it started as, the glass walls, the steel frame. It's a hybrid of tennis and squash, as you can see with the net, the yellow ball. Racket sport, obviously, but you can play against the glass, boasting like squash. So it's a fun hybrid.
And it's a fast-paced sport, right?
Oh, it is, absolutely. You'll find out shortly now when you're out there running around, but it's a great workout for sure.
Tell us about then how you got this facility up and running.
So I'm in business with my partner Jeremy, who you've probably met earlier, I think. So Jeremy's a wine specialist. I have a racket sports background myself. We were doing luxury holidays for a while, tennis and wine tours of Spain. When we were in Spain, we started playing paddle with our guests, and fast forward 20 months, and this is our big baby now.
This is your big baby, and it's doing really well. Grace, tell me, how long are you playing paddle now?
I was playing it for 4 months.
4 months now. And what's your favourite thing about paddle tennis?
Probably that I could play with my mom and dad and I make a lot of new friends.
A lot of new pals. And what's the hardest thing about paddle?
So there's this square in the court with cones around it and you have to try hit the ball into that. I think that's the hardest part.
And you're still trying to do that?
Yeah.
Well, practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah.
You're also in the panto, I believe.
Yeah.
What were you in last year?
I was a dancing spoon.
You were a dancing spoon, and this year you're hoping to be in the panto as well?
Yeah.
Good girl, and you're looking forward to it?
Yeah.
And you're loving the sport down here this morning?
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you so much, Grace. We're going to pop over here to Heidi. Heidi, tell us why you enjoy paddle.
I love this sport. It's indoors, so all year round you can play.
You stay nice and dry, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's also my husband and my teenage daughter have also started playing, so as a family we get to hang out.
Kieran, you're pretty in pink over there. Tell us why you started playing paddle.
Well, I had a preview of it before it opened. We were part of the fit-out. So it's hard not to enjoy it, to be fair. So expansion pending as well, by the way.
And it's a proper good workout, right?
It is, yeah, to make bits of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Mark, we were talking about inclusion, and inclusion is a very important part of your setup here.
Yeah, for sure. So we kept an innovative pay-per-play business model. So the facility is open to everybody. So we don't have a membership or a joining fee. So that's allowed it to everybody can play. So we have special needs groups here all the time. The Rebel Wheelers, a Cork wheelchair users group, are starting with us next week. Down Syndrome Cork were here a couple of weeks ago. Just 3 weeks ago, we actually won the Pride of Cork Award for diversity and inclusion. So it's a huge part of who Jeremy and I are as promoters, to have a facility for everybody.
And I saw some signers down here as well this morning.
Yes, Fiona is one of our regular players. She does weekly coaching and she brings her interpreter with her every Monday night. So yeah, really special for her to feel comfortable in a scenario where she could do that. So
it's all about diversity and inclusion.
It is.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to give this paddle crack a go. Jeremy is back with us all the way from Australia.
Absolutely. Now it's time for you to get out on court there, Deric.
Come here, I have my shorts on, look.
And he's got his Paddle Tennis Ireland hoodie there. So we're going to get you standing just behind the service line there. You're partnered with Jesse, one of our coaches. We've got Lyra, our head coach here. and she's going to be helping direct.
Now, do I
feed some balls in.
Do I service like a proper tennis ball?
It is.
Any way you want.
Bounce the ball and then hit it over the net into the other side there.
Okay, here we go.
That is
nice.
brilliant. Here we go.
And now,
Lovely
this can
shot,
obviously hit
Jesse.
off the back wall, right?
That is what makes paddle different to tennis, is that the ball is allowed to bounce, hit the walls, and then we can hit it again before the ball bouncing a second time.
Okay.
Oh, that's a great lob.
There
Over
we
to
go. We're
Oscar.
getting into the swing of it.
And here's
Jeremy,
Jesse.
is it always played in doubles?
Yes, it is a game that is always played in doubles. There is no singles format of paddle.
Oh, look at that for a spin.
Hey, and he's won the point.
I'm really
Great
getting into the
job
swing of
there,
this
Deric.
now. Where can we
Lion,
find out more
big money.
online? Where can we find out more online?
Oh, you can find more online at paddletennisireland.ie.
All right, for me and all the crew here, get those balls. Come on, guys, keep hitting them. Back to you in studio. Let's go. Oh, look at that.
What a facility.
Woo!
It's a goal. It's fabulous.
What a facility. And it's such a grown sport. Ah, Derek, that's disappointing.
Do you know what?
I'm a lefty.
Actually did so.
Well, lucky Derek.
Oh, God,
the
Derek,
anti-bit
just
better.
when we needed you together.
He'll join a club. He'll be really
I
good.
can guarantee we'll see him
It's a
at a
great
paddle
sport.
club. All right. Well
Yeah.
done to everybody down in Cork this
The one
morning.
in Dublin.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all over the place, popping up
Yeah.
everywhere. Thank you for that. Still to come this morning on Ireland M, we're going to meet the man who recently became the first Irish person to win a 100,000 mile foot race in Alaska. Anyway, it's a mental race in the cold.
And if you don't know what he's talking about, neither do we. And we've got some super science experiments to brighten up your Easter break. You'll see in a minute.
1,000-mile foot race.
Welcome back. We were talking earlier on. Caroline Twohig, lovely Caroline, was in here chatting about her experience of postnatal depression. We will make sure that that is going to be up online so that you can watch it, because it was absolutely fantastic chat.
Really interesting and really open and honest by her. Incredible. We have a message in. Great listening to Caroline. I would really resonate. PTSD after the birth was devastating. So naive on my first birth, which I think so many people are. It took me 4 years to have my second, and she healed so much of me. Like Caroline, it was a year before I sought help.
And Caroline just saying that she was just going around and just not knowing what was wrong with her. Just like crying all the time. And the intervention of two of our best friends basically both said to each other, "You're not great."
But it's a chemical imbalance.
Yeah,
That's
it's just a chemical imbalance. And hi, guys, just watching Caroline with my 13-month-old walking around the place, and she's literally just shared my life for 13 months. So no bonding, no love, shared their life. Had an intervention with my mother, and I'm going to see a doctor this week. And as Caroline said, it just took weeks then afterwards. And when she got the medication, she just was herself and were able to bond with her baby, and just the life came back into her and the joy came back into her.
Well, she realised she'd been bonding all the time, but she was just being very hard on herself. So thank you so much for all of the messages. We'll make sure Caroline sees them all. We really do appreciate you getting in contact about that one.
How are you going to segue this one?
So for something completely and utterly different.
Totally different. We were talking about toilet etiquette this morning.
Right.
Basically, we were, and especially in work. And what do you do? The etiquette of going into a toilet work. Would you answer your phone in the toilet? Lots of people have got onto us, and we had a megaphone this morning. And what's the results, Tommy? So would you answer your phone in the toilet or on the toilet?
We had a poll.
There you have. The winner is no, but a very close second is yes, and 43%. It's only 2% difference. There you go. Lots of people answer the phone.
I don't know. Ours
sitting
doesn't
on the
add up.
toilet.
It says no 45%, yes 43%, and only if it's urgent is 12%. So our poll is more than 100% this morning. It doesn't seem to make much sense. Much like answering the phone on the toilet.
Sue said, "My husband always speaks to his mate regarding work every morning while sitting on the loo." his mate is used to it. There you go.
But see, I think if you're at home, it's different. But would you answer, when we're saying if you're out in a restaurant or somewhere, would you answer the phone?
Okay, this is from Anonymous, and I understand why you're anonymous. I think there's an awful lot of people that this will resonate with. I always wait until my boyfriend goes to work to do any major business.
Really?
That I can talk. Yes.
What do you mean? Do you not do any major business in front of Phil?
We've been together 8 years now. It's a little bit different, but certainly for the first few years, it was trying to keep the romance alive.
We have another one. I have zero issue going to the toilet anywhere. There you go. I grew up in a house with 10 siblings. So you were very lucky to get to the bathroom and not have to run down to the forest. Truth.
Forest?
I mean, dropping it off in the forest, bring the dock leaves with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who got involved with our Easter crack there. That was all that we were doing. That was
Etiquette in school.
Thank you. Now, coming up, whether it's deep sea diving or rowing across the Atlantic, we'll be meeting a fabulous adrenaline adventurer who has done it all.
Yeah, we're going to be catching up with Galway man and adventurer Gavin Hennigan after the break and asking him about his toilet
and when he was doing all that.
When he's doing the rowing, yeah. Question in a second. Welcome back. Now our next guest has just made history by being the first Irish person to complete one of the world's toughest races.
Insane. Yeah, he's back on Irish soil now after trekking through Alaska for 24 days. Please welcome adventurer Gavin Hennigan. Good morning to you, Gavin. Congratulations, first of all.
Thanks.
You are just back from the Iditarod Invitational 1,000-mile foot race in Alaska. I think it's the toughest kind of adventure extreme race in the cold. Tell us, what does it entail?
Yeah, it's, as I said, it's 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometres across Alaska. So the Iditarod historic trail has been there for maybe 100 years, and it links together a lot of villages and towns across Alaska. And there's a dog sled race, which is what it's quite famous for, which goes on around the same time. And yeah, it starts just outside Anchorage in the capital of Alaska.
What sort of temperatures, what sort of conditions are you going through?
I mean, you get everything really. So you're out there for, like 24 days. So, you know, you've got extreme cold is the main thing. So it was down to -40 at one stage. And -50 wind chill, and then even got rain in the end.
I thought it was a foot race.
Oh yeah, that's flying in the Alps. Yeah, bit of paragliding.
Yeah, this is not the Iditarod now.
No.
So
I wasn't. Yeah.
Caught out there.
Caught out there. I'm sure we'll have some footage of that in a second. So you're going out from Anchorage, capital city of Alaska. And you just said that it's a dog trail race as well.
Yeah, dog sled trail.
But you have a sled behind you.
Yeah, well, I'm pulling the sled. Like I'm like the dogs, you know. But I'm pulling the sled behind me. Yeah.
Because what do you have to bring with you?
Yeah, so I've got all my survival gear. So I've a very warm rated sleeping bag, so -46 sleeping bag, a bivouac bag, a stove, food, extra gear, extra clothes and stuff like that. All the big mitts, you know, goggles, like down.
-46 sleeping bag.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Is that just 75 sleeping bags?
No, it's a down sleeping bag and it's extremely warm. Like, I mean, you'd be, if you got into it here, you know, you'd be boiling to death in a matter of minutes, you know.
Right.
But it would be the ideal thing to keep you warm in those temperatures. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is what, like, 24 days of just trekking through this.
Yeah.
I mean, is it wonderful scenery? Like, do you get to take it in?
Yeah, I mean, you can't not take it in. I mean, out there for that amount of time. Yeah, it changes a lot. You're going through the mountains. You go through the Alaska Range, so you're further down from where Denali is. You cross over a pass there called Rainy Pass, and then you go across the interior then through these old mining towns, so all the gold rush mining towns, all these old abandoned towns.
Wow.
And then eventually hit the Yukon River, and we travel on the Yukon River for 300 kilometers, and that's like, it's a mile wide in places. Like, you know, the banks on the side of it are like 30 foot high. You know, it's very, very vast. And then you cross a land section, and you end up on the coast, and you're following the coast all the way up to Nome. And there's one point there where you just showed a bit of it, where you're actually crossing the sea ice. So you go over the Bering Sea sea ice for 30 miles.
You go over the Bering Sea?
Yeah, that's part of it there. Now the ice, you can just see it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously, I know there's a lot going on with climate change and all that kind of stuff. You were comfortable doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it's well frozen up there.
Well frozen.
Yeah. I mean, the ice is couple of meters thick.
I think we'll hopefully show a picture of your face as well, because when you're talking about minus 40 degrees, like there's obviously the risk of frostbite. There's obviously the risk of frozen, like eyeballs freezing. Like what sort of dangers are you encountering?
Absolutely. So in those sort of temperatures, you need to be covering pretty much up everything. And if you don't cover up anything, it can't be out for that long, you know. So I had big mitts on, and like I had a pair of gloves on underneath it, but you've no dexterity. So if you take out your hands to do something, you got to get them back in, you know, quickly, like within 30 seconds. And then if they do start to get cold, you need to get them warm, like instantly, or else you are going to get frostbite, you know.
Is it because we were talking about the toilet earlier on, or is that just where my brain has gone to, that I'm like, that must have been tricky?
You don't want to hear the toilet stories. Yeah, no,
oh my God. How many people...
How does that work?
You see?
You don't have a lot of time.
Okay. I can imagine.
Okay.
How many people do this race?
So there was, I think, going to the 1,000 mile, there was about 40, but that's bike, ski and foot. So there was only on foot, there was 12 altogether.
12 of you?
Yeah, and 6 of us finished,
Because you've got 30 days.
Yeah, you've cut off 30 days, so it's quite tough. Like, I mean, you're looking at like sort of like 40 miles a day to finish the way I did in 24 days.
24 days?
Yeah, 25 days, yeah.
Like, it's incredible. And look at you with the flag there.
Yeah, I got the flag out and zip-tied it to my ski pole and finished in,
Tell us, because adventure racing is nothing new to you.
Yeah.
How did you get into this?
Like it's probably just through the job I had with diving. I used to get some good time off, and I was just, you know, into traveling and stuff. And I've been.
What do you mean diving now?
I was a commercial diver for a lot of years, working on the oil rigs, and I did a lot of travels. Then just kind of got into doing a lot of adventure stuff, you know. And it was just kind of one thing led to another with running and doing marathons and ultramarathons. Yeah.
Because you have done various types, right?
Yeah. So I was rode across the Atlantic in 2016. Yeah. So
that was a big one.
Yeah, that was my other biggest one, I'd say. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Because that was you. Where did you go from?
From La Gomera in the Canaries to Antigua in the Caribbean.
Antigua, and we saw like the pictures at that stage. You were on the news all the time.
Yeah. It was great coverage at the time. Yeah.
Huge coverage at the time.
Yeah.
Because you also got a record with that.
Yes, race record at the time. Yeah.
You're like at the time.
I was broken since, so we were, you know.
But these are all things that you have done that we look at and we're like, oh, look at that. But you continue to do more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
Where does the impetus come to push your body in such a way, in all different terrains?
It's just a challenge, I suppose. It's like, I mean, it's not like even looking at Alaska before I went out there, I couldn't get my head around it. You know, 1,000 miles is ridiculous. I hadn't, you know, it's not like you go out and do a 500 miler warm up, you know. So it's massive to me as well, you know. It's that, you know, I definitely need to be clear about that, you know. So I'm not just taking this stuff in my stride, you know. It's a huge challenge to do it, you know. So like I'm trying to, you know, do stuff that, you know, really, really challenge me, and that's, you know, and try and take on the biggest and the baddest stuff, you know.
You're an amazing success story. Like everything that you're doing and these challenges is incredible, but also the fact that you've turned yourself around, because you mentioned that you were working the oil rigs, but even before that, I know you suffered with addiction.
Yeah.
And that's something that was always there. You ended up, I think, going to rehab.
Yeah.
What was your addiction?
Drugs and alcohol, yeah. Okay. So I'm 22 years clean and sober now. So I was in rehab down in Clare when I was 21, you know. So yeah, I left school. You know, no qualifications or anything like that. Ended up in a lot of trouble, you know, at the age of 17. Actually left Ireland. I was over in London for a couple of years, and I was really going absolutely nowhere, you know. And I came back and ended up in rehab, like, yeah.
And that first time that you went to rehab once, and it took.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it had a profound effect on me, you know, because it kind of the penny dropped big time, you know. Like a lot of people, like when they have drug or alcohol problem, you know, you hear stories, people are kind of like losing their family, losing their jobs and all stuff like that. Like I was so that I didn't really have anything to begin with, you know, because I was, you know, kind of stunted by that addiction. I'd never learned to drive. I'd never finished school. I'd no qualifications, nothing, you know. You know, I had, you know, basic jobs here and there, but I never was able to hold anything down, you know. So I suppose, you know, when I was at that point when I was, you know, at my lowest, like I was really frustrated by the fact that I did want to do a lot of stuff in life. Like I had the desire to go out there and live life, but I just wasn't able because of the addiction, you know. Yeah. So it was that desire to live, you know what I mean, that got me to you know, to get clean and sober. And then from there, like, you know, it was a case of just, you know, learning the basics of life really. And then, you know, one thing led to another. You know, I stayed I stayed clean and sober for those 2 years in Galway, and kind of just put one foot in front of the other. And then after that, I went to Australia, and that's where I became a diver, you know.
And then having these adventure races just gives you that new purpose in life.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like, it's, you know, it gives me, you know, I think one thing with addiction and you know, drugs and alcohol, like, it really stunts you in terms of, like, your self-confidence, your self-belief, you know. It really knocks you down, you know. You've no kind of belief in yourself, you know. So for me, it was about kind of like building myself up and doing these things, which gives me sort of, you know, good self-confidence and stuff, you know.
It's phenomenal what you've done in life. You got to check out everything on his Instagram, on Gavin's Instagram page. It's amazing. Because what's next?
Yeah, just taking it easy for now. I was just getting a load of hot cross buns into me there.
Lovely,
back
fair
and forth.
play.
Yeah.
Hoping to get the feeling back into your toes.
Yeah, it'll be grand. It'll come back there in the next
No
couple
feeling
of
in
months.
his toes at the moment,
Well,
everybody.
listen, the first Irishman to complete the Iditarod Invitational 1,000-mile foot race in Alaska. Absolute madness. Congratulations.
Thanks,
to you.
guys.
Well done
Cheers.
to you,
Thanks
Gavin
very much.
Hennigan. Thanks
Pleasure
so
to
much.
meet you. God, my 3K run really seems bad now, I have to say. After the break, we've got short stories from author Rebecca Ivory.
I see you back here after the break.
Not even a 5K, lads. Hello, now welcome back from Teenage Troubles to Midlife Woes. Rebecca Ivory's collection of short stories already has the, and we've got to say it with reverence, Sally Rooney seal of approval, and has landed her as the Irish Times debut author to look out for.
Now, Rebecca joins us now to tell us how she creates these stories. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. She's like, I'm not used to these things.
No,
I'm
I'm very much
to
not used to
You're
it.
very welcome to the
Thank
show,
you.
Rebecca. Look, tell us about the book and describe it for us. And are we all going to get some free therapy from it?
I suppose it was probably more therapy for me to write than for anyone to read. But thank you so much. Yeah, it's a collection of 9 short stories, and I suppose if anyone reads it, they'll see fairly quickly these are people who keep making the same mistakes over and over, despite their efforts not to. They really can't connect. They can't communicate with the people in their lives. That's a kind of consistent struggle for them. And I think also the reason I like to write about these kind of people is the running commentary in their head versus the way they kind of present themselves to the outside world. So that's a very common theme throughout the 9 stories. Yeah.
And that's kind of a universal theme, I think, for an awful lot of people, what's happening in their head.
Yeah.
Like perception versus reality, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think we're we're all kind of faking it till we make it. And I think in these stories, that's certainly the case. I mean, there's a story about a journalist who does have to go undercover to work in a kind of a charity where she has to accost people on the street, as she puts it. And I think she just feels like a fake, both as a journalist and also working undercover like that. So I think that's a situation where, she feels very demoralised, both in her job and her life, and having to pretend to be something she isn't.
And you've actually been a journalist. You were in journalism. You said you just couldn't hack it. You couldn't going and getting those stories. You couldn't do it.
Absolutely. I'm having PTSD just being here now, I have to say. It's like pulling up in the car. I was like, oh no.
That's what we like to do.
Traumatising
the trauma going into these two.
I'm sure I worked at the Daily Mail for a little while, and I'm sure if my boss encounters any of these interviews, he'll be like, yes, you were a terrible journalist. I hate confrontation. I can't cope with having to ring people, and I nearly
trying to get the scoop.
Yeah, and then I end up empathising with the villain, and I just kind of go, maybe you're not that bad. I don't know. I just kind of over-empathise with them a little bit. So yeah.
And was there 9 stories? Did you have 9 stories, or did it develop into 9 stories?
I think it just developed into 9 stories. I think the first 4 probably were written with the intention like that of nobody ever reading them. And then I suppose in Ireland there's a great support system for writers. There's kind of there's a career progress you can have. Like, you come up through the magazines, and I think after the first few stories were published, I kind of thought, maybe I'm not terrible at this, maybe I can try it and see how that goes. And then you get an agent and that kind of thing, and then you just realise that without meaning to, I think when you write short stories, they all sort of are in conversation with each other,
Because that's something that's very true of free therapy, I think. You know, it is your album. There is a spine and you are telling a story. They're very intense. They're intense books, so I can imagine. How long did it take you to write this?
I suppose overall about 4 years or so.
Wow.
I think the first year, I really kind of, I suppose the first while, as I said, like they weren't really that organised. And then when I did kind of start to write with the intention of it being a collection, the first year I was kind of living in Canada. This was like before COVID, but we were living in Alberta where it was like minus 20 degrees all of the time. Or for the first kind of like 3 months we were there, we went in the winter. So that was kind of in preparation for COVID. So I had this total isolation period to write these stories. So as I was saying to you, like you feel like as a writer, you feel like a strange person because you might isolate yourself a lot and then you have to go out and talk about the stories. And yeah, they are intense. And I suppose some people have kind of said like the characters aren't very likable, but I do feel like they're projections of me. So I'm trying.
Tell us about some of the characters in it then.
Yeah.
Well, push and pull, I think.
Push and pull.
Yeah.
Two teenage girls.
Two teenage girls. They're very much in competition with each other, which I think happens with women. And I think women are sort of conditioned to be obviously really nice to each other all of the time. And I think then when you sort of see some of the stuff that lurks underneath in terms of comparisons with body image or, you know, competition between teenagers with other guys or people they're interested in romantically, it can be embarrassing. I think that's why people feel they're intense, is that maybe, I don't know, maybe they recognise some of their own thoughts when they read it and they go, I don't want that to be me, but it is.
I could really recognise some.
It's a bit cringy,
But it is some of our teenage lives back then, how girls were with each other. And it's something we talk about all the time, about this intense relationships that they have where they love each other but they hate each other. It's mad.
Yeah, and I do think probably like as a person I'm quite like fairly chatty and light-hearted, and then I think when some friends read this they were like, I didn't realise you were that kind of depressing.
But I mean, you're that like that. But you've had your own relationship with therapy. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I suppose like this is the trouble I got myself into giving the book the title Free Therapy. You know,
you're going to have to ask the question.
No, I did. I started therapy when I was 19, and I kind of didn't. I was just very, very insecure, very unsure of myself. Didn't really know anything about counselling or anything like that. So I started in a group therapy setting, but it was really weird for me because it was great because it really did give me like a toolkit for, you know, just getting through your 20s or whatever. But it was also really odd because I was with people who are, you know, in sometimes like 30s and 40s and kind of expected to give them feedback. And I look back and it just feels like very precocious, this 19-year-old with a full face of group therapy, kind of like full face of braces giving feedback to someone in their 30s with a huge amount more life experience than I did. And I think back and I go, oh God, like it kind of brings me to my knees with embarrassment sometimes when I think about that. But it was really great.
So you got stuff from it?
Yeah, I got stuff from it. But I kind of left after like 6 years. I was there for a good while, and then I still do individual therapy. It's a great, it is a good tool for life. You know, I mean, I sometimes worry, do I become too introspective with it? But yeah, I think if you're using it not to avoid failure or difficult feelings, you'll be okay. I think it's when you're maybe using it as a way to kind of bypass any kind of difficult emotions. It's
a brave thing to do, group therapy. Very brave. Like that's opening yourself up into a huge way, much like you are when you do kind of short stories and you're like, okay, here you go, I'm putting this out. We did the intro there, and as we're saying it, I could just see you going, oh my God, because it's Sally Rooney giving you the seal of approval, which every writer worth their salt wants, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
of course.
Like that must have been a lovely thing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, 100%. Sally edited my first short story. She published it in the Sting and Fly, and I think I said before, like I think when I got the acceptance email, I thought it was like a cruel prank being played on me at the time. So, yeah, it is. But like I think in Ireland, in fairness to us, like we do have. It's like in lots of ways in Ireland, I think the community is very good and everyone is incredibly supportive. And obviously you're after launches and parties, you're in the pub together having the crack and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you kind of become like, you don't see them in your day-to-day life, but it's nice to have that support.
To catch up.
Support.
It really is like that. And I know authors who come here a lot say that about other authors. Like there's not a competition here.
No,
You're all supporting each other.
I don't think anyone's in competition with me anyways. I don't think I'm a threat.
Not yet.
The Irish Times have you as the one to watch. They'll be out. They'll be out, I tell you. It's absolutely lovely. You do family and stories incredibly well. The road rage story, all that kind of stuff inside there. It is all of human emotion. It's called Free Therapy by Rebecca Ivory. The novel is being worked on right now?
Yes, yeah. So it just need a lot more time to do that. So this is all kind of, this stuff is a bit destabilising when you're trying to write a novel. You just need more time to organise your thoughts and stuff like that. So
like, I've got to go in and get traumatised traumatised by those two on Ireland AM.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh no, I'm delighted. I'm very grateful, very grateful.
The next interview is with the Irish Daily Mail, I believe, your old boss.
Yes, you're re-traumatising me all over again, yeah.
The book is called Free Therapy. Really good book. Rebecca Ivory, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Now coming up next one for all the kids at home, we're going to be doing lots of signs.
He can't read what that word is.
Spectacular.
So we'll be back with you in a minute on Ireland AM.
Hey, you're very welcome back. Now, for anyone with kids in the house in need of entertainment, it's been a long midterm. We've got you covered.
Yes, fellow science joins us now with some experiments to help cure the boredom. Good morning to
Morning.
you.
How are we?
Lots of boredom. What are we trying to do?
Well, we're going to try is the operative word because all of this will definitely work.
You're normally a lot more sure about it.
I'm just a little tired.
Is this the baby?
I just had a new baby.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. There's Fela. Hi.
Beautiful.
She's so adorable.
Oh, beautiful. And that's her when she's great and she's not
she never cries.
She never cries. Not sleeping. Go on.
Yes.
Anyway, she's got fun childhood ahead of her with you as a dad.
This is all day, every day.
What are we going to do first?
So we're going to try and do some simple kind of stuff with things that you have either around the kitchen or at home that wouldn't, like, you don't have to go out and buy a lot of stuff. So Ziploc bags.
Yeah, got those.
A couple of things.
Yeah.
So on them we've drawn like little, it was actually World Rainbow, is Rainbow Day today? National Rainbow Day? I think so. Yes, they are. News. All I would like you to do is draw the outline of, on that, you can do the same, or just outline of the lines on it, so the black lines.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is just draw out the outline and you have the colours on it, and what we have is a little bit of water in front of us, and what should happen is when you put it into the water, refraction, or the bending of light, should cause some of it to disappear and the rest to stay around. Now, it's going to be a little bit different to catch it on camera, but Alan has done this perfectly. Tommy's slowly catching up. Done. Fine. Great. That's good. That's good. We'll try Alan. So you can see that you have it here like this, and then when we put it in, and if you look at it's going to kind of have to come down. This, parts of it should disappear, and you should only see the line. Oh, here we go. There we go. Try and get it this way. Oh, part of it's disappeared. Yeah, you can see. So, so you can kind of see it there.
Yeah.
It's gone.
So the green and the pink is gone.
The colour's gone.
The colour's gone.
Why is the colour gone?
So light, when you see light as it is now, it doesn't necessarily bend. But when it goes through a different medium, like water, and it refracts or bends a little bit. So that's why, essentially, why you see lights at different colours is either they're being absorbed or they're being bent at different rates. So you can kind of use this to do maybe secret messages, and you can work with lots of people. If I put this in again, if we can get that back in, you can see if it works. Oh, from the top. I was asked to, you have to come from the top. No, you can't see from the top down.
Okay.
You can't see it that way as well. But anyway, it was going to say.
Pete in today.
It was going to say. It's just as the camera work there is.
What did it say?
Oh, we can try again.
We can try again. From up top. So you get it down and go it in. It's how many people you can get this to work with. It's 10 siblings that this will work with.
But what does it say when you're just looking at it like that?
It's just a message.
Yeah, it's just a message.
That's amazing.
And then you put it under, and that's it. So kids would love that. I have a secret message. You've got to see.
So it's a bit of
That's
crack.
pretty cool.
Yeah. But simple, like as in Ziploc bags and permanent markers. You put permanent marker on the outside. So very simple stuff that can be a bit of crack.
That message is great idea. Yeah, very
cool.
Tommy's
in the loo. He's given us a sample.
Urine sample we have there, and then Alan, you have a clearer sample.
I have a clearer. I have a better.
Yeah, less salt in that one. So we're going to make
here?
two different kind of visual things. One's a lava lamp, and one's kind of like dancing raisins. So if you add raisins, if you add a little bit of the water into this, just top that up. Yeah. And then this, you have water in the jug there. If you add a little bit of water into this, just pour a little bit in, and what happens is, so water and oil, go a little bit more, please, Tommy.
The lava lamp.
Keep going until I tell you stop. Stop. So what happens with this is you've got a layer of water now at the bottom because they're different densities.
Yeah.
So they're what's called immiscible, which means they don't mix. You obviously like oil floating on the top.
Yeah.
So you can get things. So what I want you to do is add a few drops of food colouring into that. Mostly water, though. Go on to see the blob. Your technique here is flawless. So what you have, so that won't mix either. That will go down to the bottom.
Can I do some more?
Yeah, you can. Go wild. You just want that's enough, though. Cheers.
Okay. He's to bring this home.
Measurement.
Gonna be cooking with this later. I knew I'd ruin it. There we go.
There we go.
Sorry.
So what I want you to do is now add an Alka-Seltzer into that. So what this is an effervescent tablet. So it doesn't mix with the oil, but when it gets down to the water, which you put in.
Oh yeah, it's all starting to the lava.
If you just put a little bit more water in, because
you
have to
can
have
see it. It's starting there. It is. Yeah.
We go down the bottom. So when it starts going down, the water will start mixing with the Alka-Seltzer and it'll start fizzing.
This kind of homemade lava lamp.
Look at that. Isn't that fab?
And it changes the density of the oil and it goes up and you'll get this rotation. But it's hours and hours. And you can put this in a sealable container and you can reuse it again and again.
What when the Alka-Seltzer's done?
Yeah.
Is it you just pop another one in?
You just put another one in. So
but an Alka-Seltzer won't last for hours,
No, it won't. No, but
you just keep that.
This is particularly reusable again. So you can have this, particularly for...
really cool. It's really relaxing.
It's really relaxing, but it's also for as a sensory type of thing as well. It can be really easy just to chill someone out or get them to
play some nice music.
Work at it, and you can get it...
Have a massage.
Good. Other versions.
Now, what am I doing?
So put some raisins in.
I've raisins here.
Just put them in. Drop them in, and literally what will happen with these is you're going to change the density of the raisins by bubbles that are going around it, and they'll start dancing. So you get raisins with air coming around it from the water will attach, and as the water attaches to them, they'll change their density and they'll start
up and down.
This one will start. There goes one flying up, and again, kids will spend ages
just looking at
watching this, and it's
fizzy water and raisins. Tommy,
is that raisins in particular? You can use any.
And that's the experiment.
Like peanuts.
Peanuts works as well, Dancy Peanuts.
Okay.
But it changes different things. So you can have an experiment where they write something out, what works, and then it has a kind of different ratios of what works. And look, how more entertaining is Adam?
And this is amazing too. I love that.
Like
a lava lamp,
very simple little stuff.
Homemade lava lamp.
Yeah, and you can do it in a bottle, like a 2-litre bottle, if you wanted.
I'm loving the lava lamp. Not so mad about the dancing race.
Really? I think that's pretty cool.
Okay, very good.
Okay, let's move on to our final experiment.
Final one then. Okay. So this is a little bit of a challenge.
Now we're going to put a straw through potatoes.
Yes.
Without boiling them.
Without boiling. You said this earlier on.
Using a knitting needle.
Oh, we're getting a knitting needle.
You see, this is the challenge. You're going to get a spud each.
Okay.
There goes your spud. They are real potatoes.
Yeah.
So you can pick an implement that you can go through the potato.
A knitting needle will definitely go through
and it's a stab through, but don't hit yourself. Okay, so how far did you get?
Oh, not that far, actually.
Okay, so if you... if you do
Tommy
that...
was determined to get that. Right. The pencil would probably be better, wouldn't it?
Give it a whack. Not too far.
Well, not too far either.
Give it a whack.
Now, don't tell me that straw is going to go through that
So this is the thing. So if you try the first time with the straw, now it is a normal type of plastic, old plastic, which you cut...
Oh, it went through.
A bit.
As much as the thing did.
A bit. Now, see... but this is the perfect thing. With excess force, snapped in half.
Yeah, but mine went actually in.
Yours did pretty well because you did things. So if you hold the top or bend over the top of your straw, So what you're doing with this is you are trapping air inside it then. So essentially what happens when you hit down...
when you hit it.
The air is trapped. It creates rigidity in the straw. So if you do it now, when you do this, so give it a bash, it should go pretty much all the way through.
Okay, let's give it a go.
Now give it back.
Oh, yeah, went in. Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Tommy keeps breaking it.
Yeah, no, that's not far.
No, but at least I would never thought a straw would go through the potato.
So you try this, and you go all the way into it. And kids, again, will be mind blown, but you've also got a small surface area of the straw going through, but you're creating strength in it by having that column of air. It's being compressed. You've got little stuff. So with raisins, with oil, food colouring, stuff, look, it's still going over. See, it's still bubbling.
That's still bubbling away over there.
Hours
If
of
you
fun.
don't have an Alka-Seltzer, is there anything else that works in that?
Other effervescent tablets, like vitamin C tablets or anything else that bubbles a little bit as well.
And you can just stick them in and turn it into a little face of some
And
sort
a little potato head.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
That's really cool.
The level of technology involved here is stunning.
I'm definitely going to do this one. I just think that's amazing. And that's so easy as well.
Yeah, really.
The dancing raisins.
Nice and easy.
Phil, where can people find you if they want to find more?
Face on it.
There you go, look at this.
There you go.
You can find me at Philip Sides on Instagram or all the other bits and pieces, and you will find me in a corner, hopefully, somewhere with a cup of tea. hiding from
Later
the
on.
You need it.
Later on.
Congratulations as
Thank
well.
you so
Delighted
much,
for you.
Phil.
That's all we have time for. We're in what's coming up tomorrow.
On tomorrow's show, football legend Andy Townsend will be stopping by. Author Carmel Harrington will be talking family secrets and going back in time for her latest novel. I think she did that with her last one as well.
All the way around there.
I know, yeah.
And we were talking about this last week. Should parents have priority when it comes to requesting time off from work?
Absolutely.
Especially around Easter time and Christmas and those holiday times. Should the parents get priority? We're going to be talking about that tomorrow from 7.
Yes, come and join us tomorrow from 7. Love to thank you so much for all your messages this morning. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
See you then. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.